Hey, my name's Paul Maxwell, and today we're going to talk about why you're not hitting your personal goals. And the reason is because the goals you set are too small and too constrained and not rooted in how people actually work. If you're in this loop of saying, I want to achieve this material success or this specific outcome, and I just can't do it, it's because number one, you don't understand that beneath goals are these things called personal values. And unless you know how to specifically identify the personal values that motivate all behavioral change, your goals are just never going to stick because you're not working with the grain of human nature. Number two, you have to understand how those personal values are selected. You have to understand the process of choosing those and even digging into understanding what your personal values already are. So if you don't understand your personal values, the chances you're going to hit your goals are very low because they're not going to be informed by the actual way that people work and by the actual way that you work. So in order to achieve that, we're going to do three things. Number one, we're going to dig into understanding a model of personal values and a diagnostic process for understanding your personal values from a scholar named Schwartz. So this is Shalom Schwartz. And I have some resources that I'm going to link. Number one, we're going to understand sort of the 6 features of personal values. Number two, we're going to walk through a diagnostic experience that kind of tells us what each of these values are. And number three, we're actually going to score each of these values and go through this exercise yourself. So number one, what are personal values? So let's actually get into this and see what personal values are. So personal values are beliefs, and they're beliefs that you feel, okay? So I want to dig into this kind of in a moment, but what that means is that when you have at the core of your being, right, if you think to yourself, oh, I just want to succeed, or when you see some injustice happening in the world and you're like, oh, I just want to go make that right, that feeling that you have is a personal value, right? There's a difference between saying, oh, my personal values are the well-being of society and the good of all mankind and world peace, right? But that's just an intellectual thing. That's a status thing. The real way to sort of diagnose exactly what you feel or exactly what your personal values are is connected to your affect, okay? So this comes down to understanding personal values as feelings. Okay. Next, values actually are goals. So for example, I want to go through a couple of these values: self-direction, stimulation, hedonism. These are a couple values that we need to understand. So for example, let's take hedonism as a personal goal. That means that values are higher level concepts and experiences that guide your motivation. Okay. So they are feelings. They are goals. They are also above specific actions and situations. So for example, you might say at school that, oh, I have a specific goal to achieve something at work or to achieve something at school. But really what that is there's a higher level goal that's happening there. That is the goal, that is the personal value of realizing the identity of somebody that is self-directed. So even deeper than your goals is this aspect of identity. It is higher than that. Furthermore, they are standards. So values enter awareness when the actions or judgments one is considering have conflicting implications. Now, this is the most important thing here, is that values are trade-offs. Okay, and we're going to see this in a moment. But value, let's break this down for a second, equals what you are willing to pay. This is a common economics concept, willingness to pay, okay? WTP. This is a core economics concept, and what you are willing to pay indicates what your values are. So what are you willing to sacrifice? Which of these other values are you willing to sacrifice for the sake of your personal values, right? And then finally, these are a hierarchy, so they're ordered. So everybody has all of these 10 values, but they just exist in a certain order, right? And then ultimately they guide action. Okay. So they are behavioral. So there's no such thing as, well, I believe this one value, but I act this other way. Okay. That would be the difference between stated versus revealed. Okay. This would be stated versus revealed, right? Stated, verbal equals stated, behavioral equals revealed, right? Stated is what I say I believe, revealed is what I actually do, which are my actual values. Okay. So These are the six aspects of value: feelings, goals, identity, trade-off, hierarchy, and behavioral. Okay. These are the six qualities of values, the most important of which is specifically the trade-off piece, which we're going to get to in a moment. Now, I want to hone in specifically on what these 10 values are. All right. So just to kind of go through them, you have your actual 10 values themselves, which are grouped into various types or categories. And then they have the specific goal that the value is trying to realize. So first of all, you've got the value of self-direction. The value of self-direction is independent thought and action. Okay. This is the value where you value independence of your thought. Okay. This derives from that organismic need for control and for mastery, right? And that interactional requirement of autonomy and independence, creativity, freedom, choosing your own goals, curiosity, independence, right? That would be a personal value that you have. And again, these are above your actual goals. Just to kind of draw you a picture of this one more time, right? You've got identity. All right. You've got your identity, right? And then you have your personal values, and then you have your goals, right? And these are these 10, right? Here you've got identity, which is one thing, personal values, which is 10 things, and then goals, which are many, many little goals, right? And then here you get down into strategies and that kind of thing, right? But basically here, when we have a value, right? We have self-direction. Then we have stimulation, which is excitement, novelty, challenge in life. This derives from that basic biological need for variety and stimulation in order to maintain that optimal, positive, rather than threatening level of activation. And this need probably relates to the needs underlying self-direction values. And then we have hedonism, and hedonism is the value of pleasure or sensuous gratification for oneself, right? And that derives from the needs and the pleasure associated with satisfying them, right? This is a very common biological need that we all have. And again, it's not, well, this is a personal value for me and this one isn't a personal value for me. It's more of a sense of these all are worth certain amounts for us. And at the end of the day, what we're going to do is go through an exercise where we determine what they're worth for us based on the trade-off that occurs. And we're going to do this. We're going to understand the trade-off, right, in terms of the hierarchy. Okay, so the hierarchy is actually what informs this trade-off here, right? Then we have achievement or power, right? So first of all, we've got these 4 types, which are openness to change, self-enhancement, conservation, and self-transcendence, right? Now, within openness to change, you've got these 3 values: self-direction, stimulation, and hedonism. Within self-enhancement, you've got achievement, which has the goal of personal success through demonstrating competence. So competent performance that generates resources is necessary for individuals to survive and for groups and institutions to reach their objectives. Achievement values emphasize demonstrating competence in terms of prevailing cultural standards and obtaining social approval. And then power is social status and prestige, or control over people and resources. The functioning of social institutions sort of requires some kind of status differentiation, which motivates people and their actions. So a dominance submission dynamic kind of emerges there in most empirical analyses of these interpersonal relations within and across cultures. So power and achievement really focus on self-esteem. And again, this relates to the overall value or score that we place on self-enhancement as a type of personal value. Then we have conservation, which is security. And the goal of security is safety, harmony, and stability of relationships and of the self. These security values derive from the basic individual and group requirements that most groups have. So your security values serve your primary individual interests. And then moving on from security, you have conformity, which is the second personal value within the conservation personal value type. Conformity values derive from that requirement that individuals inhibit inclinations that might disrupt and undermine smooth interaction and group functioning. And then finally, tradition is the acceptance of one's inherited customs and ideas, right? Groups everywhere basically develop practices, symbols, ideas, beliefs that represent their shared experience and their fate. And these become sanctioned as valued group customs and traditions, and then internalized and absorbed as individual desires. So that would be the conservation personal value type. And then finally, self-transcendence, where you have benevolence as a personal value, where you're preserving and enhancing the welfare of the in-group, right? This benevolence, that is the goal, to preserve and enhance the welfare of the in-group. And then most critical are the relations sort of within the family or other primary groups. So benevolence values emphasize voluntary concern for others' welfare, like being helpful, being honest, being forgiving, being responsible, loyal, true friendship, mature love, things like that. And then finally, you have universalism, which is tolerance and protection for the welfare of all beings, where you really, this contrasts with the in-group focus of benevolence values a little bit, but universalism values really derive from the survival needs of individuals and groups, but people don't really recognize these needs until they encounter others beyond the extended primary group. So people, once they encounter others, may realize that failure to accept others who are different and treat them justly will lead to sort of life-threatening strife. So this is kind of thinking on a meta scale or a macro scale of life, right? So these are the 10 different personal values: self-direction, stimulation, hedonism, achievement, power, security, conformity, tradition, benevolence, and universalism. Each has its own attendant goal, and each belongs to its attendant parent type: openness to change, self-enhancement, conservation, and self-transcendence. Now, the way that this goes about being scored is on a specific scale, okay? Before we actually get to that specific scale, I just want to show you really quick kind of like how these different types are actually, but how these different types are actually categorized. And you know what? Let me just explain how this self-scoring works. So basically, the way that this self-scoring works is we have a survey, which is the Schwartz Value Survey. So this is the SVS, right? And the SVS scores things on a scale of -1 to 7. Okay. Now 7 would be, if I score one of these personal values as 7, it would be supreme importance. And if it is a 0, it would be not important. And if it's a -1, it would be opposed to my values. Okay. So that would be that, right? And then what I do is I go through this and I just basically rate each of these things. So what I do is I say to myself, basically, how important is this to me, right? Well, can I draw a straight line? How important is the goal of independent thought and action to me? Well, in the short term, maybe it's extremely important, right? Or let's say independent thought and action. Let's say I'm pursuing a long-term goal of entrepreneurship and owning my own business, right? But right now, I have to learn all the things that I need to learn within the context of a larger company. So independent thought and action for me is not super important right now. So let's put this at a 2, right? But long-term, it's a 7. Long-term, I'm extremely motivated here, right? Same thing here. And I'm going to go through each of these things. How important is stimulation to me? Let's say it's a 4. How important is hedonism to me? Let's say that it's a 3. Now, let's say I go down and I say, okay, universalism. Right now, I'm not really thinking about the group or benevolence, right? Preserving the in-group. Let's say that I want to be a disruptor, and I ultimately want to disrupt the current economy that I'm in and build sort of a startup that displaces the existing offering. So I say, okay, within that, let's say my short-term goal here is going to be a 7, but long-term, that disruption is going to put me at a -1. It's against my goals, right? And then what I do is I have, 7, 7, 4, 3. And then I have my long-term goals, right? Which is 7, 4, 4, 4, 4, 7, 2, 2, right? 0, right? And then what I do is I roll all this up, right? Where I have my short-term score right? Where I have my specific short-term score, which would be, let's say, a short-term and a long-term, right? And my short-term score here is 9, and my long-term score here is 14. Okay, so openness to change has that specific score, and then I roll all those scores up there based on whatever my score is here for these various things. So that's kind of the diagnostic. So what you want to do is you want to take this matrix, you want to run through this, and I have a downloadable version of this that you can then use to score yourself. That you can use. That's in a link in the show notes here. Now, what I want to do is I want to show you basically a matrix. All right. And this is something that is, again, all of this is from Shalom Schwartz. So this is just me kind of explaining some of the things that he lays out here. But what you want to have here is you want to understand basically the personal values matrix. All right. Here we're going to do personal values type matrix. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to explain these openness to change, self-enhancement, conservation, and self-transcendence in terms of this matrix, right? So what we have is we have really anxiety-based and protection and self-protection, okay? And then we have anxiety-free and self-promotion. Now, these things go in kind of different directions, right? We've got the anxiety-based self-protection side here, and then we've got the anxiety-free self-promotion thing here on this spectrum, right? Then we've got an additional axis that we have to sort of take into account here, where we've got basically, we have regulating how one expresses personal interests and characteristics. So regulating personal characteristics, and then we have here regulating our social relations, right? Where I'm not saying red doesn't mean bad. It's just to differentiate it from the green, right? And then we've got regulating social relations. Okay. Now this gives us a quadrant. Okay. Where we've got this, boom, 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 boom. Great. This goes down here. This goes across here. Now, what we have here are, again, remember, we've got these 4 types. We've got openness to change, self-enhancement, conservation, and self-transcendence. Whereas here, in anxiety-based self-protection relating to personal characteristics, we've got self-enhancement, okay? And that's achievement and power. Then we've got openness to change. This is in anxiety-free self-promotion, as well as relating to personal characteristics, right? That's going to be hedonism, stimulation, and self-direction. Then you've got in anxiety-based self-protection here, regulating and social relations, you're going to have conservation, right? That's going to be security, tradition, or rather security, conformity, and tradition. And then finally, you have self-transcendence, which is anxiety-free self-promotion in regulating in our social relations. Okay, so here we have self-transcendence, and that's going to be related to universalism and benevolence. And again, you're going to have a specific score in each of these things, right? You're going to have a max of 21 in each of these things. So out of all of these, you're going to have a max of 21, right? 21, and then you're going to have out of 21, and out of 21, right? And you're either going to have, let's say, 14, 7, 8, 2, or something like that, right? And ultimately what this does is this gives you a priority and an order set. And what you want to do is you want to rank all these things and say, basically, these are my long-term goals, right? I've got these specific 7s. I've got my 7s. These are my highest priorities. So we're going to rank those as number 1, right? Then we've got, this is 2, 2. These are all tied for 2. This is 3, 4, 5, right? These are my goals. That's it. That's just a real easy way of saying, okay, these are my personal values. And then when you have to make a trade-off, it's going to help you understand, okay, what am I willing to pay? Am I willing to pay a compromise in my tradition where I'm going to say, all right, I'm going to compromise my security, let's say. I'm going to compromise my security, my conformity, and my tradition in order to seek achievement, right? And all of that. Or am I going to do the opposite, where I say, you know what, I'm willing to compromise and give up my achievement and my power, all for the sake of benevolence? Okay. These are the trade-offs we have to make. So when we're making difficult decisions and we're setting goals and we're trying to dig into the trade-offs that are required to make goals a reality and to achieve these goals, we have to understand what is the goal ranking, what is the trade-off logic that I am willing to make as an emotional foundation for the goals that I'm trying to achieve. Okay. So once again, I'm going to have this all in the show notes for you. You'll have a little spreadsheet here that you can use to fill this out for yourself. And I hope this was helpful for you and basically setting the foundation for setting the emotional foundation for you to achieve your personal goals by first understanding that those goals are an expression of your personal values, and the personal values are the emotional logic behind the trade-offs that you ought to and are willing to make, not only in alignment with how people work, but specifically in alignment with how you work. Thanks so much for watching this video. Let me know if it relates to your own experience. Subscribe to my newsletter in the show notes, and I'll see you next time.